I thought my best friend, Laura, was helping plan the happiest day of my life, my boyfriend's proposal. Instead, she turned it into a humiliating prank that shattered my trust and revealed her true colors. Cutting her off wasn't enough. I decided to tell everyone what really happened, and the fallout was unforgettable. It all began with Dan acting a little off, not in a suspicious way, but in a way that made my heart flutter. He'd step outside to take calls or quickly close his laptop when I entered the room, always with a playful smile that told me he was up to something. After 3 amazing years together, I had a strong feeling I knew what it was. He was planning a proposal. The idea thrilled me. I dreamed of this moment, imagining the romantic setup, the heartfelt speech, the moment he'd slip the ring onto my finger. Dan was thoughtful and creative, so I knew he'd planned something special. And as much as he tried to keep it a secret, little hints kept slipping through, like when he'd ask me out of the blue what my ideal engagement ring looked like. Laura, my best friend since college, was just as excited as I was. Or so I thought. "Big things are coming," she said one afternoon while we were shopping. "You're going to love what's in store." When I pressed her for details, she smirked and said, "You'll find out soon enough." I assumed Dan had roped her into the planning process, which made sense. Laura knew me better than anyone. What I didn't realize was that she had her own plans for that big moment. Dan's secrecy only added to the anticipation. He'd disappear for a few hours, claiming he had errands to run, and I'd catch glimpses of him texting furiously, his phone angled away from me. One evening, I overheard him talking on the phone in hushed tones, saying something about final touches and everything being ready. My heart swelled with excitement. Laura's behavior added to my suspicions. She started acting extra giddy around me, dropping not-so-subtle hints that something monumental was on the horizon. "Make sure your nails are done," she teased one day. "You'll want to look your best soon." She even dragged me to the mall, insisting I needed a new dress for a special event. When I asked if she knew something I didn't, she just winked and said, "Trust me, you'll thank me later." Everything felt like it was leading up to the perfect moment. I imagined Dan getting down on one knee, maybe at the park where we had our first date or during one of our favorite hikes. I pictured Laura cheering from the sidelines, capturing the whole thing on her phone. It felt like the start of something magical, and I was sure I was about to have a memory I'd treasure forever. What I didn't know was that Laura's involvement wasn't about making the moment perfect. She wasn't there to help Dan pull off a romantic proposal. She was there to twist it into something humiliating, all for her own twisted sense of humor. Looking back, the signs were there, but I ignored them. After all, who would suspect their best friend of sabotaging one of the most important days of their life? At the time, I trusted Laura completely. That trust would soon be shattered, and everything I thought I knew about her and about our friendship would come crashing down. The night couldn't have been more perfect, or so I thought. Dan came home from work that evening with a nervous smile and told me to dress up for dinner. "We're celebrating us," he said, brushing off my questions with a playful grin. I could tell he was trying to keep it casual, but the way his hands fidgeted and his eyes darted around the room told me something big was about to happen. Thankfully, I was ready. Laura had insisted on helping me pick out a dress earlier that week, and we'd settled on a flowing red gown that she swore would knock Dan's socks off. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual, supportive self. Now, that moment feels so tainted, I can barely think about it without cringing. As we drove to the restaurant, I noticed Dan glancing at his phone more than usual. He seemed distracted but happy, and my heart raced with anticipation. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about how hard he must have worked to plan this night. When we pulled into the park near the restaurant, my suspicions were confirmed. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and a trail of rose petals led to a small clearing where a table was set up with candles and champagne. It was like something out of a movie. Dan helped me out of the car, his hand trembling slightly as he took mine. "Come on," he said, his voice soft but shaky. "There's something I want to show you." I spotted Laura and a few of our closest friends peeking out from behind some bushes, their phones at the ready. My heart swelled. Not only had Dan planned the perfect proposal, but he'd also made sure our friends were there to share the moment. Laura gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, "You're going to love this." Dan led me to the center of the clearing and dropped to one knee. My breath hitched, and tears welled in my eyes. This was it, the moment I'd been dreaming of. But just as Dan reached into his pocket, Laura stepped out from the bushes, holding a small box in her hands. "Wait, wait, wait," she shouted, grinning like she'd just pulled off the greatest stunt in history. Everyone froze, including Dan. He looked up at her, confusion and irritation flashing across his face. "What are you doing, Laura?" Laura didn't answer him. Instead, she turned to me and opened the box with a flourish, revealing a cheap plastic ring. "Surprise," she said, laughing hysterically. "Here's your real ring." The air around us felt heavy, as if the moment had been sucked into a black hole. My hands flew to my mouth, my tears turning from joy to humiliation in an instant. For a second, I thought it was some weird joke Dan had been in on, but his expression told me otherwise. He looked as stunned and mortified as I felt. "Laura," he said through gritted teeth, standing up and stepping toward her. "What the hell are you doing?" "It's just a prank," she said, still laughing. I thought it would make things more memorable, but there was nothing funny about it. The romantic, magical moment I'd been anticipating was completely ruined. Instead of feeling loved and cherished, I felt humiliated and blindsided. The people who were supposed to be cheering for us stood awkwardly in the background, unsure of how to react. Dan tried to salvage the moment. He took my hands in his and said, "This isn't how I planned it. I'm so sorry, but I want you to know this. None of this changes how much I love you." He pulled out the real ring and slipped it onto my finger, giving a heartfelt speech that I barely heard through the roaring in my ears. Laura stood off to the side, her laughter fading as she realized no one else was joining in. "Come on, you guys," she said weakly. "It was just a joke. Don't be so serious." But the damage was done. What should have been one of the happiest nights of my life had been turned into a spectacle, all because my so-called best friend thought it would be funny. As we walked back to the car, Dan squeezed my hand and whispered, "We'll talk about this later." "I'm so sorry she did that." I nodded, too stunned to respond. My emotions were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of the fallout and the end of my friendship with Laura. The laughter rang out, breaking the stillness of the park. Laura's voice was loud, her amusement so misplaced that it felt like a slap. She stepped forward, holding the fake ring box high like it was some grand prize. "Don't worry, Dan," she said, grinning ear to ear. "I've got the real ring right here." Everyone froze. Dan, still kneeling on one knee, looked up at her with wide eyes, his face a mixture of shock and growing anger. I stared at her, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Was this part of the proposal? Some inside joke I wasn't in on? Laura opened the small box with a theatrical flourish, revealing a gaudy plastic ring, the kind you'd get out of a gumball machine. She burst into laughter, clearly enjoying herself, but the rest of us stood silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. "What are you doing, Laura?" Dan's voice cut through the air, sharp and tense. He stood up, closing the real ring box in his hand as his jaw tightened. "Come on," Laura said, still laughing, though her enthusiasm was starting to waver under his glare. "It's just a prank. I thought it'd make things more memorable, you know? Lighten the mood." Her words hit me like a gut punch. Memorable? This was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, and she'd turned it into a spectacle. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back, unwilling to cry in front of her. "Are you serious right now?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. Laura rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. "Oh, come on. You'll laugh about this later. It's just a joke, okay?" She turned to the small group of friends hiding in the bushes. "Right, guys? This is hilarious, isn't it?" But no one laughed. They exchanged awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable. One of them muttered, maybe this wasn't the best idea." Dan stepped closer to her, his voice low but firm. "This wasn't your moment, Laura. This was about us. Do you even understand what you've done?" Her smile faltered for the first time, but she quickly recovered, shrugging as if it were no big deal. "Geez, I was just trying to add some fun. You're all taking this way too seriously." I couldn't take it anymore. "You ruined it, Laura," I snapped, my voice breaking. "This was supposed to be special, and you turned it into a joke. What kind of friend does that?" She opened her mouth to respond, but Dan cut her off. "Not here. Not now." His tone was icy, and the look he gave her was enough to make her finally stop talking. He turned back to me, his eyes softening. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, taking my hand. "I didn't know she was going to do this. Let's try to salvage this, okay?" He knelt down again, holding the real ring. His words were heartfelt, but the magic of the moment was gone. The fairy lights, the rose petals, the love in his eyes. It should have been perfect. Instead, All I could think about was Laura's laughter and the way she'd stolen the spotlight for her own amusement. After he slipped the ring onto my finger, the small crowd clapped hesitantly, unsure of how to react. Laura stood off to the side, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of defiance and embarrassment. Dan and I left soon after, barely saying goodbye to anyone. As we walked back to the car, I leaned on him, trying to hold back the tears that had been threatening to spill all night. "I'm so sorry she did that," he said, his arm around me. "It's not your fault," I replied, though part of me wondered if it was. Had he trusted her too much? Had I? What should have been one of the happiest moments of my life had turned into a memory I wanted to forget. And as the car pulled away from the park, I realized one thing. Laura and I needed to have a serious conversation. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that felt too loud. Dan held my hand, his thumb brushing against the ring he just placed on my finger, but the weight of the night hung between us. I wanted to be happy. I should have been. But Laura's actions had tainted everything. "I can't believe she did that," I muttered, breaking the silence. Dan sighed. "Neither can I. I trusted her to help make this moment special, and he trailed off, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "She ruined it." His words mirrored what I was feeling, but they didn't make it hurt any less. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt humiliated. And the worst part was knowing I'd have to face Laura again. I didn't wait long to confront her. The very next day, I sent her a text. "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe at noon." Laura didn't seem the least bit surprised when she arrived. She strolled in with her usual confident demeanor, wearing a bright smile as if nothing had happened. I couldn't tell if she was oblivious or just pretending. "So," she said, sitting across from me and sipping her coffee. "How's the newly engaged couple doing?" "Still mad at me." Her casual tone made my blood boil. "Mad doesn't even begin to cover it," I shot back. "Why would you do that, Laura? Why would you ruin something so important to me?" Her smile faltered for a moment before she shrugged. "I didn't ruin anything. It was just a prank. I thought it would make the night more fun, something to laugh about later." "You're seriously blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You embarrass me in front of everyone. That moment was supposed to be about Dan and me, and you made it about yourself." Laura rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. "God, you're so sensitive. It's not like I ruined your entire life. I was just trying to make the proposal more interesting." "Interesting?" I said, incredulous. "It was perfect the way it was. Or, at least it would have been if you hadn't decided to turn it into some kind of circus." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Well, excuse me for trying to add some personality to the night. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime." Her dismissive attitude only fueled my anger. "You didn't just ruin the proposal," I said, my voice shaking. "You ruined our friendship. How can I trust someone who thinks it's okay to humiliate me like that?" Laura's eyes widened, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely taken aback. "You're seriously considering ending our friendship over this?" she asked, her tone incredulous. "Considering it?" I said. "I've already decided. I need space from you, Laura. A lot of space." She scoffed, her cheeks flushing red. "Wow. Over one little joke. Unbelievable." I stood up, grabbing my bag and turning to leave. "It wasn't a joke to me," I said firmly. "You made it clear last night that you don't respect me or my relationship. I deserve better than that." Without waiting for her response, I walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding. As much as I hated confrontation, I knew I'd done the right thing. Laura had crossed a line, and her refusal to take responsibility only proved that she wasn't the friend I thought she was. That night, I told Dan about the conversation. He listened quietly, nodding in agreement when I explained my decision to distance myself from Laura. "I'm proud of you," he said, pulling me into a hug. "You deserve friends who build you up, not tear you down." His words gave me a sense of validation, but they didn't erase the pain of losing someone I'd considered my best friend. Still, I knew this was just the beginning. Cutting Laura off was one step, but the fallout from her actions was far from over. And as I scrolled through social media later that night, seeing pictures and comments from people who'd been at the proposal, I realized that this story was far from finished. Laura's version of events was already starting to spread, and it was clear I'd need to set the record straight. The aftermath of Laura's so-called prank unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Over the next few days, word spread through our friend group. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some people shrugged it off, saying it was just a joke and not worth losing sleep over. But others stood firmly on my side, agreeing that Laura had crossed a line and ruined a moment I could never get back. She was out of line, my friend Mia said during a coffee date. Who does something like that? It wasn't her place to make your proposal about her. Exactly, I replied, grateful for her support. But the worst part is that she doesn't even care. She keeps brushing it off like it's no big deal. Mia shook her head in disbelief. If I were her, I'd be mortified. Instead, she's doubling down. And doubling down she was. Laura started spinning her own version of events to anyone who would listen, painting me as the uptight bride-to-be who couldn't handle a harmless joke. She even took to social media, posting vague updates about fake friends and how people can't take a little fun anymore. One post in particular made my blood boil. She'd uploaded a picture of the plastic toy ring, captioned, "The prank that started World War III." I felt humiliated all over again. She wasn't just refusing to apologize, she was making a spectacle out of my pain. Comments started pouring in, some supportive, others egging her on. A mutual acquaintance even chimed in with, "Wow, she sounds like a drama queen." It was just a joke. Seeing people take her side hurt more than I expected. I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, that this wasn't just about the prank itself, but about the complete lack of respect and empathy she'd shown for me and Dan. I decided I couldn't stay silent any longer. If Laura wanted to twist the story, I needed to set the record straight. I posted a long, heartfelt message on my own social media, detailing exactly what had happened. I didn't attack Laura personally, but I was honest about how her actions had affected me. What was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life turned into something I'll always remember for the wrong reasons, I wrote. I've realized that real friends don't make your joy about them, and they definitely don't laugh when they hurt you. The response was overwhelming. Friends and even acquaintances reached out to support me, sharing their own stories of friendships gone wrong, and assuring me I'd done the right thing by cutting Laura out. One comment stood out, "People like that thrive on attention. The best thing you can do is move on and be happy without them." They were right. Laura wasn't the person I thought she was, and clinging to our friendship out of loyalty to the past was only going to hurt me further. As the days went on, Laura's version of events began to crumble. More people in our circle started calling her out, questioning her behavior, and the way she tried to shift blame onto me. She made herself look worse by refusing to take responsibility, Mia told me later. No one's buying her but was just a joke excuse anymore. The fallout from the prank was a turning point in my life. It forced me to reevaluate not only my relationship with Laura, but also the kind of friendships I wanted in my life. I realized that loyalty meant nothing if it wasn't mutual, and respect had to go both ways. Cutting Laura out wasn't just about the proposal, it was about reclaiming my happiness and surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared about me. And while it was painful to lose someone I'd once considered my best friend, I knew it was the right choice. Breaking up with a friend isn't like breaking up with a partner. It doesn't come with a clear script, and there's no socially accepted roadmap for how to handle it. But after everything Laura had done, I knew our friendship was over. Still, making that decision and actually following through were two very different things. I spent hours drafting the message I wanted to send her. It was long, but it had to be. I needed her to understand exactly how deeply she'd hurt me and why I couldn't continue being her friend. "What you did wasn't just a prank," I wrote. "It was selfish, disrespectful, and humiliating. You turned a moment that was supposed to be about love and joy into a spectacle for your own amusement. I trusted you, and you betrayed that trust." When I hit send, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I didn't expect an apology, at least not a genuine one, but part of me hoped Laura would surprise me. Instead, her response was exactly what I feared. "You're seriously ending our friendship over this?" she replied, her words practically dripping with sarcasm. "Wow. You're so sensitive. Grow up." I stared at the screen, disbelief washing over me. Even after everything, she was doubling down, refusing to acknowledge her actions or the pain she'd caused. It was like talking to a brick wall. Her follow-up messages were no better. "It was just a joke," she wrote. "You're acting like I ruined your whole life. Do you even hear yourself? You're being so dramatic." That was the final straw. Any lingering doubt I had about cutting her off evaporated. If she couldn't take responsibility for something this big, there was no way I could trust her to be part of my life. I blocked her on every platform, social media, texts, even email. And just like that, Laura was out of my life. The days following my decision were strange. On one hand, I felt a deep sadness. Laura and I had shared years of memories, inside jokes, and late-night conversations. There was a time when I couldn't imagine my life without her. But on the other hand, I felt lighter than I had in months. I realized just how much of Laura's negativity I tolerated over the years. The little jabs disguised as jokes, the way she always had to be the center of attention, the subtle digs at my happiness, it all came rushing back. Her prank wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of selfish behavior I'd ignored or excused. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free to focus on the people who truly cared about me, who wanted to see me happy without needing to tear me down. Breaking the news to our mutual friends was another challenge. Some were supportive, saying they'd noticed Laura's behavior for years and weren't surprised by my decision. Others tried to stay neutral, insisting it was just a misunderstanding and that I should give her another chance. She doesn't deserve another chance, I told one friend who tried to play mediator. She had plenty of opportunities to apologize, and all she did was make it worse. I'm done. It felt good to stand my ground. For so long, I'd put Laura's feelings ahead of my own, afraid of upsetting her or causing drama. But now I saw that protecting her had come at the expense of my own happiness, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. In the weeks that followed, I focused on moving forward. Dan and I started planning our wedding, and I threw myself into the excitement of choosing a venue, trying on dresses, and dreaming about our future together. Every time I felt a pang of sadness about losing Laura, I reminded myself that it was her actions, not mine, that had ended our friendship. As painful as it was to say goodbye, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes, losing a friend isn't a loss, it's a gain. And letting go of Laura was the first step toward building a life filled with respect, love, and genuine support. As the dust settled on my decision to cut Laura out of my life, I realized something unsettling. Her narrative was spreading, and it didn't paint me in a flattering light. I started hearing from mutual friends who had heard Laura's version of events. According to her, I was overreacting to a harmless prank, blowing things out of proportion, and throwing away years of friendship over nothing. At first, I thought I could ignore it. I believed my true friends would see through her lies, but the more I stayed silent, the more her story seemed to take hold. People who hadn't even been at the proposal started questioning me, asking why I couldn't just laugh it off. I knew I couldn't let Laura control the narrative. This wasn't about getting revenge or dragging her name through the mud. It was about reclaiming my story and standing up for myself. If Laura wanted to twist the truth, then it was time for me to set the record straight. I spent hours writing and rewriting a post, carefully choosing my words. When I finally hit publish, I felt both nervous and empowered. In the post, I shared everything that had happened that night, from the magical setup Dan had planned to the way Laura had turned it into a spectacle. This wasn't just a prank, I wrote. It was an incredibly selfish act that turned a moment of love and joy into one of embarrassment and humiliation. It wasn't funny, it wasn't harmless, and it wasn't okay. I made sure to focus on my feelings and experiences rather than attacking Laura directly. I wanted people to understand why her actions had hurt me so deeply without resorting to the same petty tactics she'd used. Almost immediately, the responses started pouring in. Friends, acquaintances, and even people I barely knew reached out to offer their support. "I can't believe someone would do that to you," one friend wrote. "You're handling this with so much grace." Some people shared their own stories about Laura, recounting times when she had crossed boundaries or made hurtful jokes at their expense. "Honestly, I've seen her do stuff like this before," one mutual friend admitted. "I just never thought she'd take it this far." The overwhelming support validated my decision to speak up. For so long, I doubted myself, wondering if I really was overreacting or being too sensitive. But hearing from others who saw Laura's actions for what they were reminded me that I had every right to feel the way I did. Perhaps the most surprising message came from someone I'd never met before, a former friend of Laura's who had seen my post through a mutual connection. "She did something similar to me a few years ago," they wrote. "She made my personal moment into a joke, and when I called her out, she turned it around on me. I thought I was alone, but reading your story makes me realize it wasn't just me. By telling the truth, I not only reclaimed my narrative, but also gave others the courage to share their experiences." Laura's behavior wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern of selfishness and disregard for others. I knew Laura had seen my post when she sent me a short, angry text the next day. "Wow. I guess you're determined to make me the villain. Nice to see what kind of person you really are." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My story wasn't for her. It was for me, for Dan, and for anyone else who had been hurt by her actions. For the first time since the proposal, I felt like I was taking back control. Laura's prank had stolen a moment I could never get back, but by sharing my truth, I ensured that her version of events wouldn't be the one that defined it. After the dust settled from the fallout with Laura, Dan and I were left to pick up the pieces of what should have been a joyous time in our lives. He was quieter than usual, the weight of the ruined proposal clearly eating at him. One night, as we sat on the couch, he finally broke the silence. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have known better than to involve her. I thought she was helping, but instead, I gave her the chance to ruin everything." I turned to him, placing my hand on his. "This isn't your fault," I said firmly. "You couldn't have known she'd do something like that. None of us did. Don't let her take away from what you planned. It was beautiful. You were perfect." His eyes softened, but the guilt lingered. "I just wanted it to be special," he admitted. "You deserved a perfect proposal, and I feel like I let you down." In that moment, I realized how much the incident had affected him. 2. The proposal wasn't just about me, it was about us, and Laura had stolen something from both of us. I decided then and there that we wouldn't let her actions overshadow our happiness any longer. To make things right, we decided to plan a private getaway, just the two of us. No distractions, no interruptions, and definitely no Laura. It wasn't about recreating the proposal or erasing the past. It was about creating new memories and reclaiming our joy. We booked a cabin in the mountains, tucked away from the world, and spent a long weekend hiking, cooking together, and talking about our future. For the first time since the proposal, I felt at peace. There were no prying eyes, no lingering tension, just the two of us enjoying each other's company. One night, as we sat by the fireplace, Dan surprised me by pulling out the ring box again. "I know this isn't how I planned it," he said with a shy smile, "but I wanted to ask you again, without anyone else around." Tears filled my eyes as he slipped the ring onto my finger for the second time. This time, it felt right. This time, it was ours. With Laura out of the picture, everything felt lighter. It was like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. Looking back, I started to see how much her negativity had permeated my life, even before the proposal. Laura had a way of making everything about her, even in subtle ways. She'd turn the spotlight onto herself during group outings, interrupting conversations with her own stories. When I shared good news, she'd find a way to downplay it or redirect the focus. At the time, I'd chalked it up to her personality, but now I saw it for what it was, a pattern of selfishness and insecurity. Without her constant influence, I felt freer to embrace the happiness in my life. I threw myself into wedding planning with a renewed sense of excitement, leaning on friends who genuinely supported me. The process became something I looked forward to instead of something I dreaded, knowing there'd be no drama or sabotage. Dan and I also grew closer during this time. The proposal incident, as awful as it was, forced us to confront challenges in a way we hadn't before. We talked openly about our fears, our frustrations, and our hopes for the future. It brought us together in a way I hadn't expected, strengthening the foundation of our relationship. One evening, as we flipped through a wedding magazine, Dan turned to me and said, "You know, I think Laura did us a favor." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? How do you figure that?" "She showed us who she really was," he said. "And yeah, it hurt. But now we know who's really in our corner, and that's what matters." He was right. Losing Laura had been painful, but it had also cleared the way for something better. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, and I was ready to move forward with gratitude and love. The end of my friendship with Laura left me with more questions than answers at first. I replayed years of memories in my mind, trying to understand how things had gotten to this point. Had she always been this selfish? Or had I just ignored the signs because I valued our history so much? When I looked back, it became clear that Laura's behavior during the proposal wasn't an isolated incident. She'd always had a way of making everything about her. Whether it was hijacking group conversations or making jokes at my expense, there had been a pattern I'd been too blind or too forgiving to see. I realized that I'd often made excuses for her. "She's just being Laura," I'd tell myself whenever she crossed a line. But her so-called prank wasn't just an embarrassing moment, it was a wake-up call. The biggest lesson I learned from losing Laura was about boundaries. For years, I'd let her push mine because I didn't want to upset her or cause conflict. I thought being a good friend meant putting up with her quirks, even when they hurt me. But the truth is, Real friends respect your boundaries. They lift you up, celebrate your joy, and stand by you when you need them most. Laura had done the opposite. She had turned one of the most important moments of my life into a spectacle for her own amusement, and that wasn't something I could forgive. It also taught me the importance of recognizing when a friendship has run its course. Not everyone who laughs with you is your friend, and not everyone deserves a seat at your table. Letting go of Laura was painful, but it was necessary for my own peace and happiness. Still, there were moments when I mourned the friendship we'd once had. I missed the good times, the late-night talks, the inside jokes, the feeling that she was someone I could always count on. But as I reflected more, I realized those memories were from a time when we were younger, less complicated. Over the years, we'd grown into different people, and I hadn't noticed just how far apart we'd drifted. By clinging to the past, I had been ignoring the reality of our present. And that reality was that Laura wasn't the person I thought she was, or maybe she never had been. Either way, I knew cutting her off was the right decision, not just for me, but for my future with Dan. The experience changed me in ways I hadn't expected. I became more intentional about the relationships I nurtured, focusing on people who genuinely cared about me and who showed up for me without strings attached. It also deepened my gratitude for the friends who had supported me through it all. People like Mia, who never doubted my side of the story, or Dan, who stood by me when I needed him most. These were the relationships worth investing in, the ones that brought joy and strength into my life. Most importantly, I learned how to stand up for myself. For so long, I'd prioritized keeping the peace over speaking my truth, but Laura's actions forced me to confront the harm that silence could cause. It was a hard lesson, but one that ultimately made me stronger. As I planned my wedding with Dan, I felt a new sense of clarity. This was a fresh start, a chance to build a life surrounded by love, respect, and honesty. And while I would always remember Laura as part of my past, I knew she had no place in my future. Today, Dan and I are happily married, and the chaos of the proposal prank feels like a distant memory. When I think back on that time, it's less about the hurt Laura caused and more about how we grew stronger as a couple because of it. Occasionally, we'll share the story with friends, but only as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of setting boundaries and protecting your joy. Our wedding day was everything the proposal wasn't: peaceful, joyful, and full of love. Surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us, there was no drama, no selfish interruptions, just pure happiness. Standing at the altar with Dan, I felt the weight of everything we'd been through melt away. It was a moment of true clarity, a reminder of why I had let go of relationships that didn't serve me. Laura wasn't invited to the wedding, of course. Her absence was a non-issue. I barely thought about her that day. It was liberating to know that I had created a space free of her negativity, where my happiness was mine to enjoy without interruption. Looking back, I realized that Laura's actions no longer hold power over me. For a long time, her betrayal felt like a scar that wouldn't fade, but now, it's just a reminder of how far I've come. Cutting her out of my life was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also one of the most empowering. Since then, I've focused on surrounding myself with people who uplift and support me. My friendships now are built on mutual respect and genuine care, and the difference is like night and day. The people in my life now would never turn my joy into a joke or make my happiness about themselves. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful for what happened. Laura's betrayal gave me the clarity I needed to reevaluate my relationships and prioritize my own well-being. It taught me to trust my instincts, to stand up for myself, and to never settle for less than I deserve. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned from all of this is the value of truth. Laura's actions forced me to confront not just her behavior, but also my own patterns of avoiding conflict and excusing disrespect. By choosing to tell my story, I reclaimed my narrative and found my voice. Life isn't perfect, and neither am I. But the painful experiences I've been through, like the fallout with Laura, have shaped me into a stronger, wiser person. They've shown me that even the messiest, most hurtful moments can lead to growth and healing if you're willing to face them head-on. Today, I wake up every morning next to the man I love, surrounded by friends and family who truly support me. The joy I feel now is deeper and more genuine because I've fought for it, and because I've learned to protect it. As for Laura, I don't think about her much anymore. She's a part of my past, a chapter in my story, but nothing more. If I ever do reflect on what happened, it's with a sense of peace and gratitude for the lessons it taught me. And if there's one thing I know for sure, It's this: life is too short to waste on people who don't respect your boundaries or celebrate your happiness. The truth, no matter how painful, is always worth standing up for, and so is your own peace.